Tell me what is my life without your love? Tell me who am I without you? By my side. Oh, tell me what is my life without your love?
Hi, I'm Robert Cassard, Guitar Discoveries. About a year ago, I did a 5-part series on what I learned from each of the Beatles and their producer, George Martin. So the John Lennon video, which included my cover version of Julia, is number 1 in terms of views, but surprise, George Harrison is a strong number 2. Now, I get it. George may have been the quiet Beatle, but he really made some noise over time. He had the nearly impossible task of evolving as a solo songwriter in the huge shadow of Lennon and McCartney. And all told, the Beatles recorded 22 of George's songs. And of course, he wrote Something and Here Comes the Sun. Those are the 2 most successful songs from the final Beatles album, Abbey Road. And then post-breakup, George's spirituality and musical depth really rose up from the wreckage of the Beatles. You know, a lot of people say his triple LP, All Things Must Pass, from 1970, is the best LP by a former Beatle. Now, I personally don't care about rankings like that, but All Things Must Pass is an epic LP with a bunch of Hera songs that are unquestionably masterpieces. And that album also includes one of the most memorable pop rock songs George ever wrote, What Is Life? So on vinyl, I remember it opened side 2. I'd flip the disc over and then wham, What Is Life? Such a rocker, full band, fuzz guitars, huge vocal chorus, brass strings. It's like a classic Phil-Spector-produced wall of sound. And I've always loved it that way. But What Is Life has a beautiful melody. And if you strip off the window dressing, the lyrics are really intimate. So a few weeks ago, I stole a few hours and started to play around with it. And I'm really excited to share what happened. It's a great Hera song in a radically different style. So stick around. I'm going to blow up the song and let you see and hear inside my recording process and explain how I produced it the way I did and why I'm freaking proud of the results. So to reimagine What Is Life, I wanted to do something very different, but still with the essence of George. And George was never afraid of a slow tempo, right? The song Be Here Now from Living in the Material World is really slow, but it totally works. Like Be Here Now, What Is Life has melodic phrases followed by open space where the vocals sit out. What I feel, space. I can't say space, but my love is there for you. It's a lot of space. So when you slow that down, the open spaces get a lot more open, and that really inspired me. I realized how expansive this song could be, but in a way that's almost polar opposite to the kind of bouncy pop style of the original. So I experimented with tempos and settled on 72 BPM. And I wanted a slow build, like an incoming tide that rises higher and higher slowly. So before you realize it, you're drenched in sound. Now, if I stuck to George's full song structure and the slower tempo, it would have been too long. So I streamlined it. I eliminated the guitar intro and launched right into the first verse. I started with a cathedral-like backwards guitar swell. What I feel. So when I produce my own records, I always start with drums because for me, the groove affects the feel of everything I'm going to play and sing. Watch my Ringo video if you want to know about the importance of rhythmic feel. So for this track, I used brushes instead of sticks because they're quieter and tighter, and I think that makes them feel more personal. So I always lay down a drum part that goes all the way through the song, and I just assume I'll eventually finesse it. I'll pull drums in and out. I'll probably re-record sections and make other changes once I hear everything else. Next step, recording 2 acoustic guitar tracks, one strummed and one finger-picked. And I knew I'd pan them to the left and right. I wanted the guitars to have a dialogue with each other across the stereo field. So I played both of those parts on my Martin HD40 MK Dreadnought. And I used hand positions in the key of D, but with a capo up at the 7th fret. So that transposes the song up to A, which is actually a 5th down from George's original key of E. Okay, so why D positions with a capo at the 7th? Well, this is a classic George thing to do. Here comes the sun, right? D hand positions, capo at the 7th. Makes the whole guitar sound bright and happy. And that's a great way for me to compensate for the much slower tempo and for lowering the key by a 5th to fit my vocal range. So with just the drums and the acoustic guitars, it sounds pure, kind of sweet and folky. But I also wanted a sense of space and sort of Harry Georgeson spirituality. So I wanted to hint at Spector's wall of sound production, but less muddy and dense and in your face. So maybe not really a wall of sound, but kind of like a back wall of sound. Now, I recently discovered some beautiful sample libraries from an indie company called Somerville Sounds. In particular, I found an Elskavon patch called Blossoming. This was exactly what I heard in my head. So check this out. Lush, right? So kudos and a shout out to John Meyer and his partners at Somerville Sounds. I do not get paid to recommend them, but you gotta check them out. Their woven violin samples are goosebump inducing, so link in the description. All right, so remember, I got rid of that guitar intro at the start, but I knew that do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do riff was gonna make for a cool instrumental bridge. And again, I just kept asking myself, how can I honor George with each choice I make? You know, he always sought out new sounds, right? And of course he played sitar, which sadly I don't, but Logic Pro has a sampled sitar, and I only needed it for a few notes, so, you know, just a whiff of sitar incense, right? So here's how it starts the bridge. So I blended the sitar with another exotic instrument, a guzheng from Asia. I actually added 2 guzheng parts, one playing melody lines and the other playing chords. Well, then I couldn't resist adding a psychedelic Beatles touch, Mellotron flutes. And I played them in a pattern a la Strawberry Fields Forever. This is kind of a wink and a nod to both John and Paul, because John wrote Strawberry Fields, but Paul played that beautiful Mellotron intro. Here's my flute part. All right, that's the skeleton I used to start layering vocals. No bass yet, no electric guitar, but the structure and the vibe of the arrangement were there. And then I started singing. You know, I just felt inspired to let the melody lines stretch and hang in the air.
What I feel, I can't say, but my love is there for you any time of day.
So on the original, I love how George doubled his vocals an octave higher on certain phrases. So I did the same thing in a few spots.
Then I'll try my best to make everything succeed.
All right, then it was time for harmonies. The second verse is where it felt right to bring in a harmony part, basically just a third above the lead vocal. And again, because the lines are really long, you really have time to hear what the harmony is doing.
Tell me, what is my life without your love?
Of course, it needed a third part, even higher, right at the top of my range. And I brought it in a little unexpectedly in the middle of a phrase. But for me, it really paid off the third verse. You know, it kind of feels like, thank you for these harmonies. And I sneak in a momentary blues chord just to make sure anyone listening doesn't get too comfortable with how pretty everything is.
Tell me, what is my life without your love? And tell me, who am I without you?
All right, so that was day one of recording and arranging and where I left it overnight. Day two, just added the bass part. Everything else is kind of spacey, so I wanted to really ground it, and I went for my best Klaus Voorman late 60s bass tone.
What is my life without your love?
At that point, I was pretty happy because it was already feeling and sounding like a record to me. So I played it for my in-house musical consultants. That's my wife, Bara. She's my partner in our band, Cosmic Spin. And my son, Eli, who produces music under the name Jaka. And my songwriting and all-around creative daughter, Avalon. And they got it right away. So that felt really good. Now, I also played it for my friend, Mark Vickness, of the progressive acoustic group called MVI. Super talented guitarist composer. His main suggestion was to lose the snare on that exotic bridge section. And I'll come back to that in a sec. Okay, so on day three, I modified, refined, and electrified everything a bit. I pulled out my Heritage H575 hollow body. This was built in the old Gibson factory in Kalamazoo, Michigan in the early 90s. It's like crossing a Gibson ES175 and an L5. What it sounded great on was clean, sustained chords. So to get a little edgier slide feel, I used my cheap Rogue lap steel, $150. And I tuned it like a dobro, but in open A instead of open G. So it's A, C sharp E, A, C sharp E. And it was the sound I heard in my head. I recorded a full pass of lap steel playing chords and swells that would just complement the Heritage rhythm part. You'll notice I couldn't resist tossing in a musical reference that any true Harrison fan will recognize right away. Finally, I added doubled melodic slide lines, just like George played on the original, but a lot slower. All right, last detail, the drums. Thanks to Mark Vickness's advice, I switched the drum kit and snare over to hand percussion for the bridge section. Way better texture with those instruments and a bigger contrast from the rest of the song. You'll also hear that I added acoustic guitar and electric slide guitars to the bridge. I love the final blend of exotic and familiar. All right, that's it. I got to tell you, there were so many times it felt like the spirit of George was with me while recording. And sometimes I'd get goosebumps. Other times I came close to tears. I mean, a really magical process for me. Now, I also made a very visual music video to go with the song. And I want to dedicate both the song and video to my wife and musical partner, Bara Waters. I mean, what is my life without her love? That's a question I never want to answer. All right, please do George and me and Bara the honor of watching. Leave a comment, tell me what you think. You can also stream What Is Life on Spotify, Apple Music, and everywhere else. Beautiful song. I hope you think I did it justice. So till next time, keep listening to and making music, find your bliss, and be here now.
Without your love.